Hello, today I'm going to talk a little bit about what PTSD is, how it operates inside of the mind, inside of the brain, inside of the body, and what we can do about it. So very often I find that the way in which we define problems actually can either feed into the problem and make the problem itself worse, or if we can find a better way, a new way of defining the problem, we can ameliorate the situation and start to tackle the problem head on. So if I was going to describe somebody what PTSD is, and they had no psychological background and they'd not been through counselling because they've not been through PTSD themselves, I would say it's a little bit like a traumatic event and all the chaos and violence and ugliness and unpleasantness of the traumatic event or scenario, in the case of complex PTSD, kind of possesses the individual, to use slightly superstitious and religious language, and then the individual walks around possessed by the event or the people involved in the event or the scenario in which the event took place. It kind of gets inside of the system and lingers there. So if the person was shot at, the inner self kind of shoots at itself. If the person was beaten up, the inner self kind of beats itself up. If the person was kept in a situation and psychologically and physically tortured, then the inner self isolates the self and tortures physically and psychologically. Physically will be, metaphorically through the use of drugs and self-destructive behaviours, and psychologically through the use of visual, auditory, kinesthetic flashbacks and emotional flashbacks. So it is like being possessed. The chaos of a traumatic, violent event, that shitstorm that is taking place outside of you, possesses you, and then you walk around with the shitstorm within you. That's how I would describe it. Somebody didn't know much about PTSD or complex PTSD. What's actually happening? What are these shitstorms? Like electrical storms inside of the brain? What is it that's actually happening? Well, my limited understanding, and this isn't an area of psychology that I know that much about, but the biological level of what's going on is something that is referred to as the dysregulation of the Hpa axis. This is the way in which the hypothalamus, the adrenal gland and the pituitary gland cooperate with each other to secrete a cocktail of hormones that regulate your emotional state, your levels of arousal or relaxation, your stress levels, and this kind of thing. They basically control how you feel. Why? Well, in brutally simple terms, we can almost think of the Hpa axis as one of the functions that it has is a threat recognition mechanism. So the Hpa axis talks to this itself. It perceives a potential threat in the environment, and then it's the onboard computer that processes that threat and then decides what to do about it. But not at the level of taking action, but at the level of, well, what biochemical cocktail should I release right now into the body, into this human, that gives them the best chance of survival? Well, and we evolved for immediate threat, not long-term exposure to the sword of Damocles that's perpetually hanging over you but that never drops. But, oh shit, there's a fucking lion, run away. Oh shit, there's an enemy from another tribe, smash his head in with a rock. Immediate, and it's over, and it's done. And that's how we've evolved over millions of years. So modern life, with all of its multiple traumas and multiple threats, is deeply confusing and offsetting to the Hpa axis. And combat zones, and even just the process of going through the military training is traumatic enough and unnatural enough to put people into a state of PTSD. I was reading a piece of research yesterday that actually said in the military there's more PTSD outside of combat zones than there is within them. So we've really got to review, if that has even a grain of truth to it, we really need to review the way we commonly think about this issue, the way we frame this issue, and the story we're telling ourselves to be true about what it means to have PTSD and how we treat it. Okay, so let's go back to this thing. If the Hpa axis is functioning in a logical way, what it is doing is it's saying, there's a fucking tiger, release a load of chemicals that allow us to run like fuck, with no care for pulled ligaments, with no care for even broken bones, because between a broken bone in the process of fleeing a predator and having your face ripped in half, your body's going to make a decision and go, yeah, you can live without a leg, but you can't live without your face. So sorry, leg has to go. And this is why you get into a certain state where you won't feel pain, where you won't feel the stress of injury. You'll just be able to keep going. So it's quite a brutal and strong chemical cocktail that it releases. It would be like the equivalent of, let me see if I get these medical terms right. When your body makes a chemical, you know, we say, oh, you're releasing hormones. Like you just had an adrenaline spike. Apparently the truth is it's not just adrenaline. It's adrenaline plus. There's like a sort of this, you know, the brain, the hormonal system's equivalent of a barman there, putting together this cocktail and then going, take all of that. It's never just adrenaline, but okay, fine, whatever. That's an endogenous release. Exogenous is when it comes from the outside. The drugs that we have developed are usually a fairly poor replication of what the body produces for itself. For example, neuroepinephrine, which is just a simulation of something that the body actually produces itself if it needs energy or if it goes in survival mode for something. What does it do? It increases heart rate, it opens up the capillaries, it causes the person to become more aroused in the neutral, non-sexy sense, in the purely biological, psychological sense of alert, aware, ready to do something, whatever that might be. So if you imagine that your body, in the face of a threat, this is just the way I figure it, it's like a mad doctor has run over and he's injected you with, I don't know, testosterone, neuroepinephrine and PCP so that you can fight like fuck or run like fuck away and jump over walls and do all the amazing things that we've heard about people doing. You know, like lifting cars off people and moving huge pieces of machinery out of the way to save a child. And I always thought those stories were urban myths, but I spoke to a mate of mine, and he was a good instructor, James Neidlinger. He's actually a former Marine as it goes, US Marine, and he was saying that no, these stories are true, but what you don't hear is that they break. People break themselves to do that. He told me a story of a guy who hung off something for 20 minutes whilst waiting to be rescued. Well, he wasn't a professional rock climber or a professional powerlifter. Powerlifters wouldn't be able to do that, but a professional rock climber. So I was saying, well then, how did he do it? He said, well, he did it because it was that or death, but he broke his arm doing it. Like he had to have surgery because he broke his own arm through the strain of hanging from it because his arm wasn't conditioned for that. Okay, I've made my point. Brutal chemicals flow through the system that are so strong they can permit you to break your own bones and tear your own muscles off the ligament like this. You guys and girls who've trained a lot probably already know this. When you deadlift, whatever your max deadlift is, it's going to be like 50-60% of what you could really do if the brakes on the central nervous system were switched off. Well, these mad chemicals that fire into you when you see threat are so powerful that they can turn off the brakes in the central nervous system and allow you to do it, but you can also get injured, you know, deadlifting twice what you would normally. Okay, here's the problem with PTSD and with CPTSD. There's no tiger. That's to be the name of the book. There's no tiger. ... There's just the memory of the tiger. So in the case of people with PTSD, they think tiger, chemical injection. Tiger, chemical injection. Tiger, chemical injection. Now bearing in mind, this process of chemical injection is meant to be a one-off thing. You might, in evolutionary times when we were still nomadic and we were scavengers and we were hunter-gatherers, living in tribes of 30 to 40 people, maybe only living to like 40 years old, you might only ever really experience that 5, 6, 7 times in an entire lifetime. Now people can experience that 5, 6, 7 times a day. and then they get really tired and they get really worn out, and then we have terms like adrenal fatigue, and you know, in other times it could have been related to it would have been described as one of the symptoms of battle stress. If you go back into the old literature, the old psychology from World War I and World War II, extreme listlessness, unresponsiveness to the environment. Did you know that Hitler in World War I had to be treated for extreme PTSD? He had what the psychologists of the day, the psychiatrists of the day, called hysterical blindness, where there was nothing wrong with his eyes, but he was convinced he couldn't see. He was totally convinced. So these are huge levels of stress that the human being is placed under, and what happens? Well, the human being starts to break. Why is the brain playing the memory of the tiger, if we stick with that as a metaphor, over and over again, knowing that it hurts us? Well, the brain, the body, the human system wants to survive. It only ever has a positive intention, but that positive intention could literally kill you. I mean, if you think about it, every behaviour has a positive intention, no matter how stupid it appears. The junkie who's sticking a heroin needle in their arm has a positive intention, and that's to numb the pain of being alive. You know, smoking has a positive intention, which is to mitigate feelings of stress and anxiety and a lack of control and, you know, whatever it is. So what's the brain doing? It's saying, hey, that stressful situation that you were in, could be like 8, 9, 10 years ago, that could happen again. Everything seems to be calm and civilized here, but I've seen what it's like when things are chaotic and violent and ugly and not civilized. Stay on your guard. And it can't say, because it's not a nuanced communication system, the old primal parts of ourselves are very crude, very thug-like communicators. So if the how should we put it, like to use a very crude metaphor, the lizard part of the brain, that it only cares if you live or die, couldn't give a shit if you're happy, couldn't give a shit if you're depressed to the point where you want to kill yourself, only cares about raw survival in the moment, because it's too stupid to think any further. When it wants to tap you on the back and say, hey, be careful, it doesn't go, hey, you know, we should really think about safety and threat mitigation. It just goes, ah, ugh, rah, danger, and it's general. It's just general noise and roaring and growling, and this is what leads to catastrophic thinking. This is all very familiar to people who have CPTSD rather than PTSD, because they now know it's one of the things that defines borderline personality disorder. People who have PTSD engage in catastrophic thinking because the lizard brain, the primal parts of the brain is a thug, and it's going rah, rah, rah. It can't even say words. It just goes rah, and you go, what? And it just goes visual image, and you go, of what? Something horrible, the worst thing. Why? Because danger, you know. And that's his logic. It's crazy. It's a thug. It's just this big, you know, Godzilla thug monster that's trying to keep you alive, but it can't be like, hey, dude, when you've finished your cup of tea, have you thought about threat mitigation? And then what happens is a new cycle. We spoke about the cycle of communication within the brain and the body and the hormones with the Hpa Axis. There's a new cycle of communication, which is any threat, even any stress becomes threat. Traffic jam, stress equals threat. That's a boat on the Thames. That's a boat on the Thames going through London. Anything that is potentially anxiety inducing can trigger a flashback. Boom, and all of a sudden you're flashing back to some horrendous experience that induces overwhelming feelings of horror and fear or rage or anxiety and depression. That's if you're lucky enough to get visual, auditory and kinesthetic flashbacks, because at least you can go, I'm in a flashback. If they're purely emotional, then you don't get that liberty. You just think it's you. You just think I'm going crazy. And here's a good bit of news for you. If you have PTSD, you almost definitely have CPTSD. So I've just explained the Hpa Axis. I'll go into how you will have CPTSD if you have PTSD tomorrow. and how common military drills, exercises will induce CPTSD. Common tours of duty where not a bullet is fired in anger will also induce not just PTSD but CPTSD. But I'll get into that tomorrow. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you found it useful. The thing to remember with all this stuff, I'm just like setting the scene here, I'm going to give you more tools to actually stop this, is I want you to understand the mechanism by how this happens so that we can become good human engineers, human mechanics, and go in there and go, oh, okay, well, it's not all just chaos and pain that's coming from me, like I'm the problem. There's actually a process here. It feels very chaotic and it feels horrible and it feels completely out of control, but actually it follows a logical procedure. And if it follows a logical procedure, then it has a strategy. And if it has a strategy, we can form a counter strategy. And if we can form a counter strategy, we can fix the fucking thing, which is what you're here for, isn't it? It is, I hope. Thank you very much for your time and your attention, and I'll be speaking to you again very soon. I'll do another video tomorrow. Thank you.